legend and think, how can a man like that want to kill himself?
You are, in effect, out of your mind when you are in a depression. To ask, how can somebody of accomplishments, how can somebody who's a decent human being, how can he or she, how can they get involved in feeling this way? You know, and it's impossible. You've got it all, so stop feeling sorry for yourself.
What did I keep saying to you about?
You said go see Frank and make him and tell him.
I said, see a doctor, something's wrong, and you didn't want to go. And then we went. And then he said, there's nothing wrong with you.
Yes. And he was wrong.
And he was wrong. And I was right.
I was talking earlier about how you felt when we used to come home from the courtroom, or not so much the court, talking earlier about the second time around, the second episode.
Yes.
And we would sit in the kitchen watching McNeil Lehrer.
Yes.
And how desperately boring and difficult and frustrating it was for you.
It's not boring. It's as if you're sitting with somebody you don't know, somebody that's not interested in you. It's like being made to sit on the Greyhound bus with somebody that you couldn't care less about because it's not the person you know. It's just somebody else. And you almost go through a grieving process of losing the person you love because they've turned into somebody else now. And they're not the person you loved. And that's what happened the second time.
Yeah, the first time you were in perfectly good shape.
I was in good shape the first time because you were very frightened and kind and you needed me to help you. And the second time, you didn't need me. You didn't need anybody. You were so into yourself. But the first time you needed me. So I had a role to play. The second time, I could have left this world and you wouldn't have known the difference. And that's where the grieving comes in, because the person leaves you.
I don't think that people probably understand dependence enough and what they go through.
Yes, yeah. It's very interesting what happens. You're totally cut out. You're the last person that can help. And another thing they found, I think, is that the depressed person will pick on the person that's most important to them because maybe it's because they feel safer with them. Anything that's unpredictable, any situation that's unpredictable is really tough. I mean, if you don't know if you're going to have your house tomorrow, that's pretty tough. Or your whatever, or somebody's dying, you don't know if they'll be living tomorrow. You don't know what's going to happen. It's the same with the depressed person. You don't know what's happening. They're gone, but they're standing there. But they're gone. I mean, even you can understand it and have read every book about it and discussed it 1,000 times, and it still doesn't matter. It's just downhill. This is just it's in the air. It's in a whole thing around. A depressed person brings it with them. It's like coming in with a black cloud over your head. Everything just goes down.
That's it. That's true.
Do you have any more questions? No.
Nobody in the office really knew. They knew that I was acting strangely. That this was not the Mike that they knew. I was sort of dead, and I wasn't as abrasive and unpleasant in the office as I used to be. I'm amazed
But I don't think I or anyone else around here was aware of the mood swings. I mean, I've seen mood swings in my, you know.
Well, you guys scream at each other.
Oh, yeah, but the mood swings were crazy. But they were always crazy. You know, one moment it was, ha, 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 ain't this a gas? And the next moment was, you son of a bitch, what did you do this for? And I'm thinking, hey, one or the other, what the hell's the matter with you?
I mean, you got the realities. You've got liberal.
And whatever problems he was having out in the field with producers and stuff, and everybody was very protective, and a lot of it just never got back here.
I mean, I'm not going to just sit down and do an essay about it.
But what are you talking? We should just drop this, or you're...
This is it? Thanks.
No.
Mary, what time do you want me over there? Or don't you know?
11 o'clock.
11 o'clock. Where were you this morning? I called you at home. 9 o'clock.
Yes, I was working out.
You know, you talk a great deal about wanting to sort of keep this whole thing from folks here at the office, the fact that you were depressed early on.
What I did was, I mean, I was on trial, so I was out of here a lot during the day. And then when I came in, it was very structured, because they had to cover for me and had to do a lot of the work that ordinarily I might be doing. Because this was a subject that was forbidden. Verboten, you said cancer, or you said depression, mental illness. And they probably just thought I was down.
Do you think that you could have done any of your big interviews, Khomeini, any of the...
Under these conditions?
Under the depression conditions?
I would think not. Barry? Hi, Barry. Your Russian piece is going this Sunday.
I remember once, Mike and Mary came out to our house in Bridgehampton one weekend. And later on, she said, you know, Mary said that was one of those terrible weekends for Mike. And I said, boy, you could have fooled me. I was not aware of it. I don't think anybody really is aware when people are going through personal agonies. You know, the symptoms are not all that apparent. They are to them. They are to the families. Nobody wants people to know how screwed up they are. You know, I never realized that the worst of those times were not personality problems. They were depression problems. There was an illness.
What are you going to be doing? Stories? Your ins and outs right now, right?
I'm going to introduce Christian Amanpour's piece on the Russian army.
Good.
And then, come on. And then I'm going to do the Rooney intro, the letters, and the goodnight. Kind of promo, I think.
Okay, do you go into makeup or you go right on?
I go into makeup and you're going to stay the hell out. Gentlemen.
Good day, Mike.
How are you, fellas?
Good.
Oh. With Russia sitting on a stockpile of nuclear weapons, the sad state of Russia's military is nothing to gloat about. I remember one time I was home in the sack, didn't want to get out of bed. I was deep in the depression, and the whole cast of 60 Minutes was supposed to go on the Phil Donahue show.
I am pleased to present the folks of 60 Minutes right here. Welcome.
And I was not about to go. I just couldn't. My mouth was dry and my hand was shaking and I didn't want to get out of bed. And it was a live broadcast of the Phil Donahue show. This would have been, I guess, in '84. And so I turned it on to listen and to watch.
Where is Mike Wallace? Come on. Where is he?
He was afraid to show up.
I know he was. He's afraid of me.
He's got the flu.
He does, huh?
That's your office.
Yeah, he showed up for Larry King.
No, let me tell you. Want to know the truth?
What is the truth?
While we're here with you,
What is it?
Mike's in your office, gone through your files.
And in the middle of it, I got on the telephone and phoned it in.
Is there a caller on the line?
Yep.
Yeah, who is this? Are you there?
The name is Wallace.
Hello, Mike. We're glad.
Because I was ashamed to acknowledge that I was in the middle of it right then.
What in the world are you after, Phil? Your questions are longer than their answers.
I just did not want to talk. It was shameful. And I find this is true with a lot of depressives. They lose self-esteem. They are convinced that they are, we are convinced that we're bums and that we've just skated through life in a strange way and don't deserve the good things but do deserve the bad things that happen to us. And every once in a while, every 6 months or so, today, I don't go regularly, but every 6 months or so I go into the psychiatrist for a lube job to talk about, well, I have to go in New York State because in order to get a refill every few months on the pharmaceutical I'm taking, he has to see me and tell the pharmacist to let me have the stuff once again. There are side effects to the pills, there's no doubt about it. Almost all of them diminish your sexual drive, which is not unimportant even to an old man. I told the doctor, look, I don't like to take aspirin, and all of a sudden I'm taking this pill, and then because that pill works on your digestion in a certain way, you've got to take another pill. And suddenly I began to feel like a pill popper. But I promise you, you are willing to do it, nay, happy to do it, because it begins to lift that cloud. You begin to eat, you begin to smile, you begin to appreciate your family. If you get a good psychiatrist when you have a depression, you contemplate yourself, and you contemplate why you got there, that is, into the depression. And you stop for a moment. I mean, you really stop for a moment in your life. And if you let yourself contemplate why you are, where you are, or how you got there, it's bound to be good for you when you come out the other side.
It's a tremendously humbling experience, and there's something valuable in that, especially when you're coming up as a very sure of yourself psychologist who's exactly on track and knows precisely what causes things and what makes them better. And then you find out that you don't know squat about yourself. We are all so diverse, all of us who are called, quote, depressed, and I despise being, having my essence reduced to the fact that I have a hard time living some days. I am so much more than that, and depression is a component of me. It's not me, but many people, if they hear that one thing about you, that is the lens through which they see everything else. And that's the essence of stigma. And the stigma around mental illness is real for me on a constant basis, and, very real for people who can't even articulate. I was probably born with some sign in me somewhere that says, I'm ready to be depressed. Depression is in my family like cancer and heart disease are in other people's families. I watched my grandmother poison her relationship with her children because she was one of those people who was depressed without treatment. And was afraid, always. I loved her very much, and she was magic to me, but her darkness scared me. And I think it scared me because it resonated with something in me that I was so good at hiding. The most anyone would have said about me was that I was intense as a kid. but very productive, very driven. And that worked for me. I could outrun those feelings of, oh God, there's another day and I have to do it. I had those feelings as a kid. It's just that first of all, you didn't say those things in my house. You just went about your business and did it. But that was how it was, mixed with lots of joy. And, it wasn't really until my 20s that I began to really think that these days are starting to hang together. They're harder to get out of, and I'm running and running and running, and it's still following me, and it's shadowing me, and I can't shake it. And then finally I did go and seek psychotherapy, which as a psychotherapist would be my first idea, and that was very, very helpful in lots of ways, but it didn't take away that underlying heaviness and darkness that was getting worse and worse. And so then I tried a number of different medicines. For years, got a good bit of help through my 20s, and then the medicines stopped for whatever reasons, and we still don't know, working. Everything fell, and it wasn't just the falling away of those things, it was the sense that I really screwed it up. And then I got suicidal. I was not actively suicidal, meaning I didn't buy the gun yet. But I was haunted and obsessed with thoughts of suicide for 23 out of 24 hours of the day. And it was a constant shift between the face of my daughter and pills or guns. The face of my daughter, pills or guns. And it was just this flash, 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 flash. To want to die in such a strong way is the ultimate cruelty of a depression that is unrelenting.
I'll never forget you're sitting on the bed just sort of saying, I just don't know if I can do this, and asking me to hold your pills. I mean, that was awful. I just sort of think of that period of time as automatic pilot, and just doing what needed to be done and had to be done, because it was just feeling like I was running into a wall, a glass wall. You were on the other side, but there was just no way of reaching you.
The darker periods are in every corner, sunny or dark, in this house. The sunny parts, because I would be sad in places like my rocking chair, which is where I rocked my daughter and where I sat and relaxed. And now I sat when I was depressed and wrung my hands until I could hardly move them. There was no escape. It was all awful, and it was a prison. But the prison was in me. It just felt like it was in the house. I had a tremendous sense of failing as a mother. It registered later what damage had been done in my marriage. I don't blame myself for it, but I was most acutely aware of how unavailable I was to my daughter, with whom I had always just had such a close relationship. And all of a sudden, tucking her into bed was so hard, and listening to her long-winded stories was impossible, and I forgot the names of her new friends, and just things that put me, as far as I was concerned, in the bad mother category. And at first, the funny thing is that she was the most out there about it. When I was in the hospital and had ECT, she went into school, and I think she told it for current events. And when she came back and told it to me, it was just such a stark contrast of, here I am, the psychologist, talking about the stigma of mental illness, cringing that my own kid is talking about something that her mother's going through that's true and honest and real, and she has a right to say.
I had just entered a new school and was making all these new friends, and had this really, all of a sudden, really busy, newly teenage social life. So I had stuff that kept me occupied, and I was out of the house a lot. But, it was still there when you come home. When you live with someone who's depressed and you remember a time when they weren't, you just sort of say, you think that they can stop. I mean, you know in your heart of hearts that they can't, but sometimes you just get so frustrated and you just want to say snap out of it. And a lot of people, you know, who have friends and relatives who are depressed, it's a common feeling, and not only do you feel frustrated, but at the same time you feel horrible because you know that there's nothing that they can do to snap out of it.
Some people would say that I had to go all the way.
What is that? Explain
all
that.
the way right now to many people is progressing from medicine to electroconvulsive therapy, which people call shock therapy. And even as a psychologist who was, you know, not that far out of school, that was an amazing thing to be told, this is a good possibility for you, you're a good candidate. I ran from that suggestion like the plague.
Because of the stigma?
The stigma, because I didn't understand it, because I thought that they were telling me that I was an even bigger basket case than I was, because I made my living off my brains, and I was afraid of having the circuits blown for good. EZT has changed from all those horrendous pictures that get plastered in every story about it, with Cuckoo's Nest and even things like Frankenstein and the electric chair and just the images that it conjures up. I don't think there are many medical interventions that have that much hysteria surrounding them.
You know, I was appalled. That was the image that stuck with me because I had zip access to how successful that particular treatment is in breaking the back of serious depression. So, you know, when you came and said that, like I said, I was horrified. And then when I finally had a chance to kind of sit with it a bit, talk with the doctor, read some stuff, I mean, I still wasn't comfortable with it, but I figured that, okay, this is the next step, and it's not something that you do frivolously, but it's something that, you know, where we were. I mean, we just didn't have any other options at that point. At least it didn't feel like that to me.
The connotations of having current administered to my brain while I was asleep was very, very frightening. In reality, I went to sleep very quickly, during which time they placed electrodes on both sides of my skull, and then a 1-second pulse was delivered, which produces a convulsion that you don't see. And then 10 minutes later, I would wake up with a really bad hangover. That was about the level of how I felt, like I had been on a bender of some kind. But then I'd realize that, you know, bars don't have nurses in them.
It was just really sad because my mom's memory was, you know, temporarily sort of absent, I guess. She was very dazed, I guess. It was hard. It's not a fun place to go, the psych ward.
There was a bit more of the mysterious to this in terms of other people not quite understanding why we weren't going out as much. And also for me, again, being in the field even, there was still a certain amount of shame in terms of kind of saying that Martha was depressed and seriously depressed and had an illness. I would find other ways to try to cover. I mean, I think probably other people, you know, they didn't have to be rocket scientists to figure out that something else was going on.
Yeah, but you didn't tell your family I was in the hospital.
No, well, I did tell them that you were in the hospital, but it was sort of this vague that we're not sure what you have, and certainly didn't tell them that you were in the psychiatric unit. Mm-hmm. I mean, that I was having a hard time dealing with myself, and I would have had a real difficult time going.
Mm-hmm. And yet you're a clinical social worker, and the stigma was still so acute that you couldn't...
It was horrible.
I think it probably just goes way back in terms of, you know, the messages about people who have mental illness. It was just a deficiency. It was something that the two of us certainly should have been able to figure out and been able to move past. And if we just worked a little harder, and that it would make everything okay, and it just didn't.
Any magic and joy that you had in your life, any hope for your future, any sense of yourself as energetic or quick or bright or funny. All of those things go to a place and you cannot, for the life of you, get them back, no matter how hard you try, how much people love you, or how much they try to help you. It's the most frustrating thing I've ever known. The first time I really knew I was getting better was when I heard the sound of my own laughter. I heard a laughing voice that after several seconds I recognized as my own. It's not like I was a laugh riot for months after that. I wasn't, but it was the sense that what I thought was dead was really sleeping or hiding out, that it was coming, it was going to be back. There is sometimes something in being brought down that makes you so attentive and so celebrate things that just you didn't know, you didn't see, you didn't appreciate before. And for me, you know, it's tea, or it's dirt that smells good, or it's, you know, it's a Big Mac attack. It's you know, it's just all of those little things.
Well, I only look upon Mike Wallace and others whom I'm close to as sort of brothers in suffering. I can relate entirely to his agony because I suffered the same thing. I think it's a temporary death of the soul. I think one can say that in severe depression, the entire body and spirit of a person is in a state of shipwreck, of absolute desolate lostness. Nothing animates the body or the spirit. It's a total wipeout. I've often wished that we would revert to the original term, melancholia. It's a perfectly respectable word. I think if people learn to use melancholia as readily as they use depression, it might have more of an impact. Depression is a wimp of a word. It means very little. It means you connect it with a declivity in the ground. It has no resonance. It's not remotely descriptive enough for this illness. It's not. You're not depressed. You're insane. The year was 1985, 12 years ago, here on Martha's Vineyard in this very house. I discovered that something odd about a lifetime habit, which was that something had happened to me vis-a-vis alcohol. I couldn't drink. It happened with lightning speed, and it was frightening, and I couldn't figure out what the hell lay behind this sudden intolerance of alcohol. I sensed a certain ominous mood taking over, since at night I was no longer able to indulge in this, what I used to call a daily mood bath, which was the relaxing moment after days of hard work at writing. I found myself in an extraordinary, rather nervous state of strung out, semi-exhaustion. And during the fall months in Connecticut, my other house, it spiraled downward, this mood, into a state of plunging melancholia, which involved, after a while, a constant suicidal fantasia. In recent years, last 25 years, I guess, I've made a ritual of walking 3 or 4 miles a day. I still do. And it's my only concession to the health madness in America. And I enjoy it. And I remember in this particular instance, when the depression was seizing me at its most intense, the walks in the woods became kind of Dante-esque nightmare visions of nature. I was in the grip of absolute horror, and so that this flight of geese that flew over me, these Canada geese that I used to love that honking sound, gripped me with terror. I'll never forget that. was like being stabbed through the heart with fear and anxiety. And when that happened, I really knew that I was in a very steep descent somewhere I didn't want to go to. One of the most interesting phenomena as depression deepens and the pain increases is a curious bifurcation of self. You feel as if part of you, the normal you, is observing the you which is the sick and distressed you. And the sick and distressed you really is so filled with pain that he wants to die. At the same time, the parallel you is observing with sort of horrified detachment and fear and trembling and terror the other self which wants to die. I'll never forget walking down a New York street and seeing a young guy with a boombox on his shoulder. And he's about 16 years old with a 16-year-old girl. And this hideous noise coming out of this boombox. Both of them looking hideous to me. Yet at the same time, I envied them with a passion. I envied these two raucous kids who ordinarily I would have fled from because of the noise they were making. I just envied the fact that they were in life and I was on my way out, or at least I thought. People who have not experienced this illness at its worst, at its extreme, are unable to perceive, as I was unable to perceive before I experienced this, that depression in its gravest manifestation creates a psychic pain that is every bit as painful as any kind of excruciating physical pain you can think of. You want out, and the only way out is death. And that's why people in extremis kill themselves when they are suffering from severe clinical depression. Though a great deal of depression involves irrational thinking, there are many moments when your mind is quite clear and quite objective, and I saw on Rose's face a look of such misery and suffering of several months into this siege of mine that I began to see that she was exhausted and suffering too.
It was so baffling, and I went through so many emotions. After bafflement, resentment, because I had no idea he was going into a depression, and I thought all these symptoms were that he was angry with me and didn't want to do all the things that we had planned, whether they were trips or dinners or, you know, staying at home and having a cozy night. Whatever it was, he withdrew from me and just said adamantly no to anything that I wanted to do. So that was the beginning of, for me, of feeling that things were not right between us and that they were never going to be.
The currency with which I once communicated with him disappeared, and you sort of no longer know how to make contact. And I think at first the reaction was, the frustration became such that you just give up, until the point at which I think we all realized that it was not something in his control, that he wasn't just didn't have time for us. He truly was in some kind of state that none of us could identify immediately.
Well, when bafflement and concern and resentment don't come up with any solutions, then it resolves itself into horror, in sort of a permanent state of horror of what is happening to him, what is happening to us, what's going to happen between him and me, him and the children, and is he going to go down the tubes permanently, and will this be the end of it? Or the horror of having to send him somewhere permanently. That was his great horror, that he would go into a mental institution and never come out and die there.
It breaks open the whole family. And there was a certain amount of discomfort, certainly, and pain that went along with that, with all of us having to own up to a lot of stuff that comes out when one person is suffering. His face had sort of completely fallen and sunken. His eyes retreated. There was no light in his eyes at all. He'd lost a lot of weight. He was really at that point incapable of sort of doing anything except holding your hand and saying, you know, I love you and I'm sorry.
On the purely mundane level, to say, I'm going to the hospital for a mental illness. Most people, even today, when there's some enlightenment about illness, mental illness, are loath to accept the fact that they are mad. It's been ingrained in people from the time they're born in our society that there's something creepy and horrible about mental illness, and something almost immoral about it. So you tend to resist furiously the idea of going to the hospital. I didn't want to go to the hospital. It wasn't so much the stigma, I was just frightened of going to a place that I knew was a mental institution. But it turned out, in my case, to be my salvation. Because 7 weeks later, after going to the hospital, I had emerged feeling well and alive again. It is something I cannot conceive of ever going through it again. And I think most people who suffer this feel the same way. But having suffered it, it was a revelation. It was a revelation about how fragile the human mind is. After all, we have to remember that millions and millions of people go through this same torment. It's not an isolated, rare event. And with that in mind, I realized that if anything, it enlarged my vision of human possibilities. It made me aware of the depth of suffering that human beings can endure. The chief question of philosophy in our time is whether we should live or die, and die by our own hand. Is suicide in the abstract, but I think that this is a question that is at the heart of the lives of most people. I think the prevalence of depression, which is so huge, is an indication of how potentially suicidal people are.
All of us who are really deep into depression think about suicide. Because the pain is raging and you can't seem to get out from under it. You try to escape it and it's always there. You go to bed with it and you know you're not going to sleep, and you wake up with it and you hate to face another day. The pain is so intense and you can't get away from it.
I was very frustrated with myself that I couldn't get myself out. But at the end, when I was thinking of suicide, I didn't want to kill myself. I wanted to spare myself any more of this agony. It really wasn't because I hated myself. It was because on some level I loved myself. and knew that if I was sentenced to an eternity of this, I wasn't strong enough. I couldn't take it.
You do love yourself. You love, I mean, you've ever since you were born, your ego has been your constant companion, and your ego has said, this life has value. So you are left with a excruciating love for yourself, but it's a love which is ultimately obliterated by the desire to get rid of this pain. I would say that the closest description I can think of to the overall sense that you have when you are suffering from depression is to be condemned to life. You're condemned to life. It's as if life itself was so painful and so without pleasure or joy, much less joy, that it's a form of a condemnation to be in this state of existence.
The scariest thing for me to, I can't say that I've overcome it, I'm still with it, but is giving up the illusion of control, of total control that I always had, that I could lay my life out in a plan, and that if I exerted enough effort and brains and whatever else and slept less, that I could accomplish it all, and that if I didn't, I was less of a person.
Are you less of a person?
No. I mean, there are parts of me that have just been through hell and probably look really battered up, but I'm more of a person.
Look, this is now 12 years after the first episode. I wound up with 3 episodes. I've never felt better. Here I am, 78 years old, never felt better in my life for a 78-year-old. All you can say is, what you can say is, hang on, hang in there. Find the psychiatrist. Find somebody who'll give you the pharmacology that is necessary to help. 9 out of 10 people can be helped.
Certainly melancholia has been a constant in the affairs of men, and it's tempered the human experience ever since men have been chronicling their own response to life. It dates back to Job, Sophocles, Aeschylus. It's been a lament that has been a continuous theme in literature and in art. And I think an awareness that we are all vulnerable. Most everyone is vulnerable to this illness is the beginning of wisdom. Because since it's possible that it can strike any one of us down at any moment, it's humbling to know this. It's humbling to know that none of us are above it, that it could seize us by the throat at any moment and toss us down. It's almost as if the gods had ordained this to happen to certain people.
legend and think, how can a man like that want to kill himself?
You are, in effect, out of your mind when you are in a depression. To ask, how can somebody of accomplishments, how can somebody who's a decent human being, how can he or she, how can they get involved in feeling this way? You know, and it's impossible. You've got it all, so stop feeling sorry for yourself.
What did I keep saying to you about?
You said go see Frank and make him and
see
tell
a doctor, something's wrong, and you didn't want to go. And then we went. And then he said, there's nothing wrong with you.
Yes. And he was wrong.
And he was wrong. And I was right.
I was talking earlier.
And that's where the grieving comes in, because the person leaves you.
I don't think that people probably understand dependence enough and what they go through.
Yes, yeah. It's very interesting what happens. You're totally cut out. You're the last person that can help. And another thing they found, I think, is that the depressed person will pick on the person that's most important to them because maybe it's because they feel safer with them. Anything that's unpredictable, any situation that's unpredictable is really tough. I mean, if you don't know if you're going to have your house tomorrow, that's pretty tough. Or your whatever, or somebody's dying, you don't know if they'll be living tomorrow. You don't know what's going to happen.
Clear about how you felt when we used to come home from the courtroom, or not so much the court, talking earlier about the second time around, the second episode.
Yes.
And we would sit in the kitchen watching McNeil Lehrer.
Yes.
And how desperately boring and difficult and frustrating it was for you.
It's not boring. It's as if you're sitting with somebody you don't know, somebody that's not interested in you. It's like being made to sit on the Greyhound bus with somebody that you couldn't care less about because it's not the person you know. It's just somebody else. And you almost go through a grieving. It's the same with a depressed person. You don't know what's happening. They're gone, but they're standing there. But they're gone. I mean, even you can understand it and have read every book about it and discussed it 1,000 times, and it still doesn't matter. It's just downhill. This is just it's in the air. It's in a whole thing around. A depressed person brings it with them. It's like coming in with a black cloud over your head. Everything just goes down.
That's it. That's true.
Do you have any more questions? No. Process of losing the person you love because they've turned into somebody else now, and they're not the person you loved. And that's what happened the second time.
Yeah, the first time you were in perfectly good shape.
I was in good shape the first time because you were very frightened and kind, and you needed me to help you. And the second time, you didn't need me. You didn't need anybody. You were so into yourself. But the first time, you needed me. So I had a role to play. The second time, I could have left this world and you wouldn't have known the difference.